In July 1960, Jane Goodall, a 26-year-old English girl, has embarked on a remarkable adventure. At the request of the British anthropologist, Dr. L.S.B. Leakey, she is to observe the daily lives of chimpanzees in East Africa. To observe the chimp in the wild is to better understand the evolution of human behavior. From Leakey's headquarters in Nairobi, Kenya, it's a 5 days journey to Tanzania's Gombe Stream Reserve. For a girl who'd hated dolls and collected worms, it's a very special day. The Chimp Reserve stretches 12 miles along the east shore of Lake Tanganyika. And 100 yards from the lake, Jane's camp is set up. Sponsored and filmed by the National Geographic Society, the expedition, which will yield what Dr. Leakey will call the most remarkable study on any primate ever made, at last is underway. Jane's permanent party will include only an African cook and his family and an African aide. Otherwise, she's on her own. Her discoveries here will startle the scientific world and lead to the possible redefinition of the word man. In search of the wild chimpanzee, day after day for 12 hours a day, Jane explores the valleys of the reserve one by one. But the chimps know she's around, and her efforts are to no avail.
I simply wanted to be amongst animals in the wild and to discover as much as possible about the lives of the chimps. Somewhere and somehow I had to find the shy chimpanzees before I could even start to overcome their fear and be able to observe them.
Leopards, bushbuck, and buffalo roam the reserve, but any thought of personal danger is diminished by Jane's determination to find and study the elusive chimpanzees. Jane finds a mountain peak offering a superb view, and from here she may be able to see more of the evasive chimps. The chimps at last. Now from the peak she can at least begin to learn about their behavior. From her mountain perch, Jane learns the chimps range over the Gombe area in small, unstable groups. They may travel as far as 10 miles a day in search of food. Groups constantly change in size and membership, merging and separating, and have no apparent leaders. Chimps, Jane finds, spend up to 2 hours a day in grooming each other. This peaceful social contact seems to give mutual pleasure. In the Gombe area, most groups live harmoniously. They are promiscuous and generously share mates. Another group has become aware of the presence of the chimps grooming nearby. With much excitement, the visitors head for the group of chimps so peacefully grooming away the quiet afternoon. There's to be a grand reunion. It will seem like a clash between enemies, but it's really a reunion of friends. chimpanzee, a hurt foot seems a small price to pay for the unbridled joy in meeting by chance friends and lovers again. For chimps, the Gombe Reserve provides a lush environment. The bulk of their diet is vegetarian. They spend up to 7 hours a day in feeding, and the great pleasure derived from grooming seems surpassed in the act of eating. It's been a long and exhausting afternoon. Chimps sometimes make their beds, Jane observes, several hours before dusk. Since they sleep where they happen to be feeding, they must make new nests almost every night. If the trees are well foliaged and the branches strong, in a matter of minutes, in their beds up to 80 feet high, they will be ready to rest contentedly until it's time to sleep. As dusk approaches, it's time for sated chimps to think of sleep. At the end of December, the long rains come to the African forest. For 4 months, it will rain almost every day. The weather is no deterrent to Jane Goodall in her determination to get close to the chimps. Although chimpanzees hate getting wet, Jane observes they don't seem to know enough to get out of the rain. Instead, they sit in wet misery and watch a single chimp perform what Jane calls the rain dance. Then, as sudden as it began, both the rain and the dance are over. Jane has watched the rain dance from a distance of 100 yards. Are the chimps becoming accustomed to her presence, or were they merely distracted by the rain? She moves in a little closer and makes a startling discovery. She sees a chimp picking a leaf, crumpling it in his mouth, and using it to sop up water collected deep in a hollow of a tree. Until this study, man alone has been considered the tool maker.
Chimpanzees have been seen drinking from natural water bowls in Uganda, but on those instances, they merely dipped their fingers into the water and licked off the drops. The exciting fact in the Gombe stream area is that the chimpanzee, by initially crumpling the leaves into a sponge, is in fact making a tool.
Jane must find further confirmation of tool making. Hopefully, she moves in still closer. The forest resounds with a call of alarm. The chimps have no real language, but a variety of calls express communicable emotions. And now the emotion is fear. It means that not yet may the blonde stranger draw near. Now Jane decides to build a blind, a screen of leaves that will help conceal her from the chimps. After nearly a year in the forest, she hopes she will be able to observe them from as close as 100 feet. She selected a place at which she knows the chimps will feed. And now, with binoculars set, she waits. chimps to observe details of chimp behavior never reported before. Suddenly, the chimps sense something is wrong. She's been discovered. The chimp seems suspicious, but undecided. They are accustomed to Jane only from afar. Now, should they remain or run away? As long as Jane remains hidden, the chimps decide, they can stay. Now Jane will be able to study the chimps as individuals, to recognize them and give them names.
Flo is, by our standards, a most ugly female. Flo's daughter, Fifi, still goes around with her family, and although she is now endowed with the charms of youth, she has many of her mother's features and will be no beauty in a few years' time. Little Flint, like all chimp babies, is packed full of charm and endearment. Leaky, a big, rugged fellow, can be easily recognized because of the exposed white of his left eye, where the lower lid has been torn. He was named after my friend, Dr. Leakey. Goliath is distinguished by his bald forehead. David Greybeard is exceptionally good-looking. His grey whiskers and his calm gaze give him an air of distinction.
Flint is observed on one of his first ventures away from his mother. Flint now totters toward the big male, Leaky. Chimp babies are indulged and made to feel secure. Violent quarrels, Jane discovers, may erupt for no apparent reason, and just as quickly turn into play. Allowed to watch. For Jane, these are triumphant days. About 40 chimps come under Jane's close scrutiny in the blind, and slowly they become used to having her near.
The chimps gradually came to realize that I was not dangerous after all, and after about 15 months, I was allowed to approach a small group without attempting to hide. I think it was one of the proudest and most exciting moments of my life.
Now Jane may work with the chimps only 30 feet away.
The animals I watched have no real language, do not build shelter, have not discovered fire, yet they are the most nearly human of all the animals on Earth.
Late in the afternoon one day, a lone chimp with her newborn baby enters a clearing on the Gombe Reserve. She's been traveling alone and is uncertain of approaching a group with her precious infant. Nervously, she sits apart from the other chimps and waits for a sign of reassurance. Her name is Melissa, and Jane names the baby Goblin. Melissa herself, bewildered by her tiny baby, is worried and unsure. Anxiously, in the chimp language of gesture, Melissa pleads her case. In gesture, she indicates her need for reassurance. Now she approaches the whole group, and again, fleetingly, reaches out her hand. Melissa and her baby have been admitted to the group. In the dry season, tired chimps like to take naps on the ground. It's a long, lazy afternoon under the trees in the shade. After nearly 2 years among the chimps, Jane now studies them in the open, tolerated, ignored. And here she will remain for 3 years more. In the forest, besides observing the chimps, Jane carries on other aspects of her work, like tasting the food they eat. She is determined to examine closely one of the chimpanzees' nests. Some are as high as 80 feet and almost impossible for Jane to reach. She's found a chimp's nest. Doesn't look very strong, but she finds it can support a primate very well. In fact, it's rather comfortable. At camp, the bread is about ready. Suddenly, the cook sees an incredible sight. Chimps are visiting the camp. Once before, a single chimp had ventured into camp, and Jane had missed him. The chimp slowly began to bring others. As arranged, a towel is tied to a tree as a signal to Jane in the field that there are chimps in the camp. Having examined the nest, Jane is out looking for her chimpanzees. There are chimps in the camp. If she's gained the confidence of the chimps to this extent, she mustn't miss them again. It's a heartwarming sight when Jane sees Flint on top of her tent. This visit means that at last her chimpanzees have lost all fear of her. They feel secure enough even to threaten her. Wild chimps won't eat anything with which they are not acquainted. And Jane has found that they do like bananas. Some grow wild in the reserve. It's a triumph for Jane when a chimpanzee accepts one from her hand. Jane can hardly believe it. After all the anxious months and years, a chimp is actually feeding from her hand. Now all the chimps want bananas, and gradually more and more follow their friends to Jane's camp. There's a free-for-all raid on Jane's large store of imported bananas. Spoiled chimps learn to discard the skins and greedily devour more than 50 bananas at a time. It's a banana orgy, as chimps already full to bursting try to depart the scene, loaded with more fruit than they can carry. The chimps make pigs of themselves, and they will defend their loot to the last banana peel. Meanwhile, Mother Flo is trying to get more bananas. But the box won't open. Even a stick won't work. For Jane is trying to regulate how many bananas the gluttonous chimps take. Jane has put a lid on the banana box and rigged it with wire so that she may ration the number of bananas the chimps eat. The lure of promised famous bananas makes possible the regular observation of individual chimps. For them, it's become a banana-mad world, and almost every day they come to get their fill. In Jane's camp, they know they'll find sustenance and long hours of sheer contentment. Between Jane and the chimps, by now practically all barriers are down. Yet these are still wild and powerful animals, and with this new intimacy, she is in greater personal danger than ever before.
Sometimes it's difficult to resist playing with some of my young chimp friends. 8-year-old Figan is always gentle when we play, but already he's stronger than a man, and soon it'll be too dangerous to play with him. At present, the chimps do not seem to realize that they're stronger than I am, and the main danger in playing with the young ones is that they might one day learn their own superiority.
Jane has come a long way from those early days of frustration and despair. Now, after 4 years in the forest, she reaps the rewards of total acceptance. At about 12, chimps reach maturity. Until then, Jane observes, they spend much time playing in the trees. One day, Jane conducts an experiment with a toy chimpanzee as a potential playmate for Flint. Jane introduces the strangely quiet new member of the group and watches for Flint's reaction. Flint's curiosity has been aroused. But like all wild chimps, he's afraid of anything new. Jane places a mirror in the forest and wonders how the chimps will react to this. They've seen themselves for the first time, and Jane records for posterity the shattering experience. One puzzled young female can't believe what she sees. It's an utter mystery. She looks behind the mirror to see who's there, but the mystery remains unsolved. Yet the image must have substance. Perhaps if she puts her hand behind. Jane notes the logical, if untutored, deduction of the chimp, and observes that older chimps are puzzled by their reflections in the mirror. But patience is short-lived, and with relief, bewildered chimps leave behind the enigma of the mirror. Now that she may work unhindered, Jane makes her greatest strides in significant discovery. A chimp scrambles through the bush with the most unexpected prey, and Jane is the first to confirm the fact that, like men, chimps in the wild eat meat.
It was an exciting moment when I first saw a chimpanzee eating meat. Exciting and important. Previously, people had thought that chimps in the wild might occasionally eat a small rodent or a nestling, but to discover that they actually hunt and kill larger mammals is something quite new. I have seen them eating the flesh of young bush pig and bush buck several times, but the most frequent prey appears to be the red colobus monkey.
Toward the rainy season, the chimps are found feeding at a termite hill. Using grass stems as fishing rods, they stick them into open termite holes, draw out the clinging insects, and enjoy an especially tasty meal. Now Jane will be the first scientist able to conclusively prove that untrained chimps not only use, but make tools. After the implement is carefully selected, it will be transformed from an ordinary stem into a crude tool made for a particular purpose. This is the confirmation of tool-making Jane has long been seeking.
The fact that these chimpanzees use twigs and grasses when feeding on termites was one of the most exciting discoveries I made. It was known that some wild animals made use of natural objects as tools, but the chimpanzee, when he strips leaves off a twig, is actually modifying a natural object to suit it to a specific purpose, and he is thus making a tool.
According to scientists, early man began at the stage of primate evolution when the animal creature began to make tools. Now, after Jane's discovery, Dr. Leakey will say, we must either redefine man, redefine tool, or accept chimpanzees as men. Jane's work will now be recognized by scientists throughout the world. It may stand for all time as a unique record of chimp behavior in the wild.
My 5 years observing the chimps have been the most satisfactory of my life. I've done what I wanted to do from early childhood. But the work has not yet ended. This is just the beginning, and it is my firm belief that a complete understanding of the behavior of the chimpanzee will eventually lead to man's better understanding of himself.